Checking my calendar, World War III is penciled in for 2027, but it could happen tomorrow by accident. Maybe a fishing boat gets lost, maybe a missile lands where it shouldn't, or maybe someone decides they don't like the way a map is drawn. The spark is Taiwan, the island everyone forgot about until it became the world's hottest flashpoint. Xi Jinping wants his army ready to invade even if it blows up in his face. After all, when you're restoring order, what's a little global chaos? Today, we're looking at why China can't afford to invade the little nation. And if you like these weekly videos, make sure to hit subscribe before my self-esteem sinks faster than the Dead Sea. Let's start with the map. China once called itself the Middle Kingdom, center of civilization, and luckily, geography agreed. Its fertile heartland was a rice factory, cranking out food and people. But that hack came with a catch. The paddies were wide open to raiders galloping in from the Eurasian steppe, that endless grass highway stretching from Europe to Manchuria. Luckily, China had built-in armor. The Hindu Kush Mountains blocked one flank, while its coastline acted as a 9,000-mile, 14,500-kilometer of coastline aquatic bouncer. Can't swim, can't come in. So as long as the steppe was protected, China could sleep easy. But history flipped the script. The steppe is quiet, and that protective bouncer isn't as juiced up and scary now. In 1949, China decided it looked good in red and went communist, so Washington thought up the island chain strategy. 3 defensive lines strung across the Pacific like tripwires. The first chain was the big one, stretching Japan to Indonesia, boxing in China's coast so tight it felt like a chokehold. But it only existed because the communists didn't win the Civil War as cleanly as they wanted. Their enemies, the nationalists, weren't wiped out. They dipped to Taiwan and the other islands around it. And like every good startup, it needed a catchy name, rebranding itself as Republic of China. New territory, snappy name, and a new government, and today, it's a multi-party democracy overseeing a vibrant economy. To anyone looking in, it walks, talks, and acts like a country. At least, that's the idea. Very few countries officially recognize Taiwan, and it's locked out of groups like the UN. In public, everyone nods along that it's part of communist China, but behind closed doors, it's all winks and handshakes. Quiet trade deals, back-channel ties, and embassy-sized not-an-embassies. That balancing act matters, because if Beijing moves in, it won't look like China reclaiming China. It'll look like a straight-up invasion, and the world's promised to hit back. It's messy, and that's the point. Beijing likes messy. Taiwan's self-rule is that China can't stop creeping on, scrolling their socials at 3 a.m. And yeah, we've all been there. China may be the world's second richest country today, but in 1949 it was flat on its back. This was a nation that once ruled as the globe's richest empire, reduced to such a sideshow that its civil war with millions dead barely raised an eyebrow abroad. Beijing calls that stretch the century of humiliation, 100 years of getting wedgied by foreign powers. However, the Communist Party swears that all ended back in 1949. Sure, Taiwan still looms just off the coast, a reminder of Beijing's unfinished business. The Communist Party has tried to seize it before, and every time, the US shoved them back. To Washington, it was containment. For Beijing, it was salt in the wound. A reminder that even after 1949, foreigners could still tell China no in its own backyard. But the people of Taiwan don't see it that way. To them, they're not Chinese, they're Taiwanese, and they want to keep it that way. 63.4% consider themselves purely Taiwanese. Just 2% claim they're Chinese. The rest shrug and say, "Why are you asking me?" Only 7% said yes to unification with the People's Republic of China, about as popular as pineapple on pizza. Taiwan's bond with the mainland has faded. They won't declare independence, not out of loyalty, but out of fear of Beijing's wrath. It's been this way for decades, but nothing stays frozen forever. China hasn't given up, and by 2027, it has far more toys to play with. And like a grumpy toddler, Beijing has no interest in sharing. If Beijing wants someone to blame for the mess in the Taiwan Strait, it can start by looking at the portraits of Mao on the wall. He promised the glory of communism. What he delivered was more deadly to China than the entire century of humiliation. 45 million people died in the Great Leap Forward. Millions more died in Mao's Cultural Revolution. No one really knows how many. By the time he finally stopped killing others and got around to dying himself in 1976, China was a wreck. Once the world's richest empire, it had sunk to one of the poorest. Its economy just 2% the size of the United States. It was 10 times smaller even than Brazil's. It was hardly the kind of power that could pull off an amphibious invasion against an island backed by the West. Things only started to change when Mao finally gave up the ghost. The party kept praising him in public, but behind the curtain, he was that uncle who never gets invited to family reunions. Mao's successors realized communism wasn't working, and getting rich looked a lot more fun. So they opened the doors to foreign trade, and the money came pouring in. By the time Xi Jinping took over in 2012, China's economy was growing by an average of 6% a year and had climbed to number 2 in the world. And then, China started to flex. It spent a lot of money on weapons. Thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles, modern aircraft like the stealthy Chengdu J-20 and the Shenyang J-35. New ships included 3 aircraft carriers with a 4th on the way. China now has the world's largest navy, with 405 units in its active naval inventory. And they're not done yet. 2 brand new nuclear submarine models are coming soon. And that's just the highlight reel. China's military buildup is happening at breakneck speed. This isn't a force built to guard the homeland, it's built to throw weight around. When US Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, Beijing lost it. From August 4th and 10th, China fired off live drills and even rehearsed a blockade. The message was crystal clear. China's not the same military America stared down in past Taiwan Strait crises. 2 carrier groups showing up won't make Beijing blink anymore. That's exactly what Washington did during the 3rd Taiwan Strait crisis between 1995 and 1996. Taiwan was in transition. In a sign of its maturity as an independent country in all but name, it was moving away from the dictatorship that Chiang Kai-shek created and holding its first democratic presidential election. And China responded like any level-headed nation. They launched a bunch of missiles. America sent in the ships. China backed down. Americans forgot, but China didn't. And today, the missiles coming from the mainland are deadlier. A breakneck economic revival and a swelling military bring new temptations. Get money, you want to spend it. Spend it on weapons, you start wanting to use them. Chinese nationalism isn't just rising, it's everywhere. Companies stopped pretending to be local abroad and doubled down on being loudly, proudly Chinese. Patriotic movies like the Wolf Warrior franchise and The Battle at Lake Kangjin have been smash hits at the Chinese box office, raking in billions. Meanwhile, Wolf Warrior-style diplomats do the same act on the world stage, picking fights with whoever listens. And back in the classroom, Beijing's even rolling out masculinity training to toughening up boys under a policy called Proposal to Prevent the Feminization of Male Adolescents. Next thing you know, they'll be handing out Andrew Tate podcasts as homework. China today carries itself with a swagger, just like 1980s America with its larger-than-life action heroes and sense of renewed confidence. But there's a difference. All that patriotic fervor points in one direction, an island just 87 miles 140 kilometers off the coast, the one Mao could never take. The last reminder of the century of humiliation at the hands of Japan and the West. Between late 2020 and early 2021, China ran a rare poll. What should be done about Taiwan? And our survey said 55% of the people would support a full-scale war to take over the island. 33% opposed the idea. The rest said they weren't sure, maybe because they could already imagine what would happen to them and their kids if it all went wrong. Public opinion doesn't really matter in an authoritarian dictatorship like China, but this probably brought a smile to Xi's face. Chinese nationalism is one of the pillars of Xi's rule. With so much history and political capital tied to Taiwan, backing off would mean a major loss of face for both Xi and the party, especially now with so much to gain. The Taiwan Strait isn't just a strip of water. It's one of the world's busiest trade routes. In 2022 alone, $1.4 trillion worth of Chinese exports squeezed through this narrow channel. And it's not just China riding the lane. According to the U.S. Naval Institute, nearly half of the world's container ships passed through the strait that year. Think of it as the Panama Canal on steroids, except this one sits between two rivals staring menacingly at each other across the water. The status quo has held for decades, but it's an unsteady truce balanced on a shipping lane. Now, China's close to having both the gear and the public backing to get moving. And Taiwan knows it, so it's making its own plays. The US may have cut official ties after Beijing opened up, but under the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, Washington still keeps a roommate who's not on the lease presence on the island. More importantly, it keeps the weapons flowing. By mid-2025, weapon sales had hit $2.2 billion, basically turning Taiwan into the guy in Grand Theft Auto who walks around strapped, with every weapon in the game. Some items on Taiwan's recent Armageddon shopping list include 108 M1A2 Abrams tanks, 66 F-16V fighter jets, 29 HIMARS rocket artillery systems, and 100 Harpoon anti-ship missile systems. They're all a part of Taiwan's Porcupine strategy. The island's goal is to make an amphibious assault so costly and bloody that Beijing takes one look and nopes out. And just to flex even more, it's also rolling out its own homegrown missiles. The Qingtian hypersonic cruise missile can hit Beijing or just about any other city on the mainland from 750 to just over 1,200 miles, 1,200 to almost 2,000 kilometers away. And the public's not sitting on the sidelines either. Nearly 3/4 of Taiwanese say they'd fight if Beijing made a move. Civilians are signing up for training, ready to turn themselves into live ammo if it comes to that. Taiwan may be brave, but it knows the Porcupine strategy only buys time. Just look at Ukraine. Putin's burned through more than 1 million men for a few miles of dirt, and he's still at it. To him, Ukraine isn't land, it's destiny. A piece of lost Russia he's willing to bleed forever for. Well, willing for everyone else to bleed for. Xi's feelings about Taiwan are similar. That's why the two get along. They read from the same script. Nation-states with borders and sovereignty? Just Western red tape. To them, the world is split into civilizations, tied by blood, language, and history. And in that story, Taiwan isn't independent. It's a chapter China insists still belongs in its book. If you've got the patience to sit through Xi Jinping's speeches, you'll hear him talk about the China Dream or the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. At the top of that wish list, Taiwan. And there's a deadline, 2049, the centennial of the PRC. By then, Xi wants the box checked. But if he's serious, he can't wait that long. It's because of gray hair, literally. China is aging fast. By the time Xi hopes to rejuvenate the nation, the median age will be nearly 52, closer to Japan than to the US. It's hard to wage war when the army's shrinking, the hospitals are packed, and the budget's being eaten alive by retirement checks. Now you see why Xi is so dead set on being ready 2 years from now. There's no escaping it. If he's going to do it, Xi has to do it soon. Realistically, within the next 10 years. If Xi or his successor waits too long, the moment's gone. This is China's high watermark, fueled by its boom years and a still massive population. Delay, and the tide goes out, leaving Beijing weaker, older, and past its best chance to rewrite the map by force. But even if Beijing gives the green light, victory's no sure thing. It would be the biggest gamble the Communist Party has ever rolled. Amphibious invasions are the riskiest play in war. Even with surprise, they're a nightmare, and Xi wouldn't have the element of surprise. The buildup would be visible months ahead, just like Putin's fake drills before Ukraine. Kiev saw it coming, dug in, and wrecked Moscow's blitzkrieg. Now it's 3.5 years and 1 million bodies later, and Putin had it easy. He didn't need to haul his army across a stretch of water first. Sanctions on China would be locked and loaded before the first boats even left port. But sanctioning China isn't sanctioning Russia. If the US and its allies pull the trigger, they'd better be prepared for a lot of pain, because it's coming their way too. China's economy clocks in at $17.8 trillion, about 17% of the world's GDP. Ever since Deng opened up the doors, it's turned into the planet's workshop. China's buried deep in global supply chains, and cutting it loose won't be clean. We already got a taste of that during the pandemic when Beijing hinted it could cut off medical supplies if countries asked the wrong questions. And it's not just masks and gloves. Pretty much everything runs through China. 8 out of 10 iPhones are built there. Android user? Don't celebrate yet. Samsung bailed in 2019, but your phone, your TV, your laptop, they all rely on the things China controls. Put it all together, China's massive economy, its role as the world's factory, and its grip on global tech, and the bigger picture comes into focus. At the center of it all are rare earths, 17 metallic elements the modern life can't run without. The name's a little misleading though, rare earths aren't that rare. But guess who's sitting on the stash? In 2023, China churned out about 70% of the world's rare earths and handled 90% of the processing on top of that. The Atlantic Council estimates that sanctions on Chinese banks, like the ones slapped on Russia, would rip $3 trillion out of the global economy. That's the size of the entire UK economy gone overnight. And that's not the half of it. China's a trade giant, but Taiwan runs the chip game. It makes 55% of the world's semiconductors and 92% of the cutting-edge ones. That adds up to 35% of the world's cars and 70% of its smartphones rolling off of Taiwan's production lines in one way or another. And it doesn't stop there. Those chips power your fridge, your TV, even your washing machine. Take Taiwan out of the picture and suddenly you're hand-washing your sweaty gym clothes in the sink. The US and its allies are scrambling to shore up supply chains, but there's only so much they can do. Taiwan insists on keeping most chip production at home, not just for profit, but to guarantee America has skin in the game. Beijing hopes that won't hold if it invades. Washington doesn't officially recognize Taipei, and there's no NATO in the Pacific. But one thing is certain, sanctions would hit like a hammer. Sanctions would crush China first. A RAND study back in 2016 estimated that a year-long war in East Asia would chop 25 to 35% off China's GDP. And the US wouldn't escape either, down 5 to 10%. And that was before the AI boom. Since then, America's pulled chunks of its supply chain out of China, but it's also handcuffed itself to advanced chips. Beijing's heading down the same road, which means it's just as exposed. Still, maybe China's gambling the US won't put boots on the ground, just bankers with sanctions. Officially, the US plays coy with Taiwan under its policy of strategic ambiguity. It won't say if it would defend the island or not. Even Ukraine had more of a promise with the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, when it gave up nukes for security guarantees. And we all know how that story ended. So if China invaded, it would have to get the job done quickly, and there's a chance it might. Although the Taiwan Strait makes that tricky, China also has a geographical advantage. The United States military is spread all around the world. China's military, it's localized. It can throw everything it has at Taiwan. And it didn't build that mountain of ships and missiles for show. The closer you get to China, the greater the number and accuracy of the missiles. Every US base in the Western Pacific is within range. Even Guam, nearly 3,000 miles, 4,800 kilometers away, is a bullseye. Missile defenses would swat some down, but some would get through. What geography gives with one hand, it takes with the other. Washington knows the missile threat, and it has plans to make China pay in a longer war. Xi thought he had a fix. Enter the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. It was a $1 trillion gamble that's aged like spoiled milk. The idea was simple: buy influence by pouring money into infrastructure in key countries and, in the process, build alternate trade routes. The crown jewel was the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, a shortcut around China's weak spots. On paper, ships from the Persian Gulf could unload in Pakistan, then roll straight into China by road and rail. Look at it on a map, and you'll see why. It's the Silk Road reborn. Except it never happened. The old routes from the 1400s are still the ones that matter, and Beijing's trillion-dollar shortcut went nowhere, which leaves China boxed in behind choke points the US Navy can camp on: the Miyako Strait, the Luzon Strait by the Philippines and Taiwan, and the Strait of Malacca. At its narrowest, only 24 miles, 38 kilometers. That's a nightmare for the world's hungriest energy user. China burns a quarter of global energy and 15% of the world's crude oil. Its own reserves? A kiddie pool when it needs an Olympic stadium. Since 1993, it's had to import the rest, and 80% of that oil squeezes through Malacca. And here's where Taiwan comes in. It locks down the first island chain. Whoever controls Taiwan decides if China's navy stays bottled up on its coast or breaks free into the Pacific. And it's not just oil. 2/3 of all Chinese trade sails through the same narrow gap. The US Navy knows it. If Beijing ever sent ships toward Taiwan, American carriers wouldn't just head there, some would sit at Malacca instead, with their hand around China's economic throat. China's medium-range missiles could hit US ships from here, but the further out you go, the weaker that umbrella gets. And America's got an ace up its sleeve. One China's missiles can't swat so easily. Surface ships and bases might be sitting ducks, but submarines are a whole different game of hide and seek. The United States had 64 submarines in its fleet last year. China wasn't far behind with 61, but numbers aren't everything. The US Navy runs nuclear subs, built to stay out for months and dive deep. Admiral Samuel Papero, then head of the Pacific Fleet, bragged that America's subs are a full generation ahead of China's. He wasn't exaggerating. China's got 48 diesel-electric subs, nice and quiet on battery until they have to surface and recharge. When those diesel engines kick in, it's basically a car horn underwater. Even China's nuclear subs, the Type 93s and 94s, are louder than America's. The newer 95s and 96s, still on the drawing board until around 2030, and cranking them out at scale will take time. Time Beijing might not have. So what if China invaded Taiwan? US subs would be waiting at the choke points. China's economy would start to suffocate if the fight dragged on, and those subs could even take shots at the mainland. And if Beijing hit US bases in the region, well, torpedoes have a way of returning the favor. What wouldn't happen is a clean one-on-one fight. The US could bring in far more firepower than China bargained for, and pretty soon, it wouldn't just be America. China's neighbors, most of whom it's managed to annoy, would be looking for payback too. 17 countries have territorial disputes with Beijing. The biggest grudge match? Japan. Almost everyone in Japan lives on its 5 main islands, but further south are a few lonely rocks called the Senkaku Islands, or Diaoyu if you ask China. Nobody lives there, but in 1969 the UN discovered oil and gas nearby, and suddenly China remembered it had owned them since the 14th century. Funny how history works when oil's involved. And honestly, that claim makes more sense than Beijing's fairy tale about ancient settlers on the Spratlys. More on that later. Lately, China's turned up the heat around the Senkakus. In January of 2021, it passed a new law giving its Coast Guard the green light to use force on foreign vessels trespassing in Chinese waters. And big surprise, Beijing's definition of its waters was about as broad as it could get. The law spells it out. Chinese jurisdiction covers internal waters, territorial seas, the contiguous zone, the EEZ, the waters above its continental shelf, and the wonderfully vague catch-all, other waters. You can guess what other waters means for Japan. China was already poking at the Senkakus, testing Japan's limits. This law turned those jabs into a giant, flashing warning sign. But more importantly, Japan can't turn its back on Taiwan. Its lifeline depends on it, and 20% of its total trade goes through the South China Sea, which China is militarizing. The Taiwan Strait carries 25% of its exports, 32% of its imports, and 90% of its energy imports. That's why, shortly before his assassination, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe warned that a Taiwanese emergency would also be a Japanese one. He wasn't exaggerating. If China takes Taiwan, Japan's very existence is on the line. Abe's murder didn't knock Japan off course. It sped things up. He laid the groundwork for a stronger military, and his successors hit the gas. For the first time since World War II, Japan's arming for offense, buying missiles that can hit targets far beyond its shores. Then, in December of 2022, Tokyo made it official. Defense spending will hit 2% of GDP by 2027. That date wasn't random. It was aimed squarely at Xi's invasion timeline. There are also around 54,000 American troops in Japan, more than anywhere else in the world. Even if Tokyo wanted to sit out a Taiwan fight, geography won't let it. Those bases make Japan part of the battlefield from day one. South Korea hosts 25,000 American troops. Seoul may talk less about Taiwan than Tokyo, but it's just as locked into the regional balance. And there's the bigger problem: trade. Geography traps South Korea in the same choke points. 90% of its maritime trade runs through the South China Sea, and the Taiwan Strait alone carries 30% of its imports and nearly a quarter of its exports. South Korea's tried to walk a tightrope under Xi's China, keeping its security tied to Washington while cashing in on business with Beijing. In 2024, President Lee Jae-myung even said Seoul should avoid picking sides and just say thank you to both China and Taiwan. But gratitude doesn't stop missiles. Once the shooting starts and trade routes narrow, South Korea doesn't get to stay neutral. Security and survival would drag it into the war. Seoul can pretend neutrality works because geography has kept it sheltered from China's roughest moves. On August 11, 2025, a Chinese Coast Guard cutter and a PLA Navy ship managed to crash into each other. They were nowhere near China, though. They were in the South China Sea, and Filipino Coast Guard personnel captured the footage. Manila was quick to blame Beijing for the chaos, and it's been pretty chaotic in this patch of the sea. In a part of the sea already crowded with warships and Coast Guard vessels from half a dozen nations, chaos is basically the default setting. China lays claim to almost the entire South China Sea with its infamous 9-dash line. The Philippines dragged it to court in The Hague in 2016 and won. Judges tossed China's claims out as illegal, but that didn't stop Beijing. She was pretty much, try and stop me. China's feud with the Philippines only got nastier from there. Ship confrontations have spiked in recent years. The two Chinese vessels colliding was just comic relief. Usually, it's Filipino ships that get crushed. If they're not being rammed, they're being blasted by Chinese water cannons, leaving Coast Guard crews and fishermen soaked, battered, and humiliated. The Philippines has done the only thing it can: lean harder on its old ally, the United States. US bases once sprawled across the country, then shrank after the Cold War. But China's island building brought them back. Now there are 9 American bases on Philippine soil. Look at where the bases are. 5 sit in the north, practically pointing like loaded pistols at the Taiwan Strait. 2 more, Palawan and Antonio Bautista Air Base, face the Spratlys, perfect platforms to choke off China's shipping lanes. Geography has made the Philippines a tripwire, and Washington's set it tight. The Philippines isn't just hosting bases, it's bulking up too. Its military buildup is aimed squarely at China's expansion, and the training has been cranked up to 11. In May and June of 2025, Filipino troops drilled side by side with Americans, Japanese, South Koreans, and even the British. What were they doing? One of the tasks involved testing the Nemesis ship-killing missile launcher. Where were they? The Batanes Islands. The northernmost, Mavulis, sits just 88 miles, 142 kilometers from Taiwan. That's closer than New York is to Philadelphia, practically next-door neighbors in strategic terms. The Philippines is building a port here too. Once it's finished, it'll be a perfect launch pad to squeeze China's trade, if Beijing pushes harder. So now the geographical picture is coming together. If China moved on Taiwan and dragged in the US and its allies, it wouldn't just face the island's defenders. It would be squeezed on 2 fronts, closing in like a vice. Add a blockade in the Strait of Malacca, with Australia leaning in, and Beijing would feel the pressure. Even with all its new ships and missiles, it's playing a dangerous game, one with a high chance of losing. And when the odds look that bad, that's when the desperate, dangerous moves come into play. What about nukes, you may ask? On paper, China promises no first use of nukes. Sounds reassuring until you dig deeper. Buried in an obscure document called The Science of Second Artillery Operations is the fine print, the scenarios where Beijing lowers the nuclear bar, and once you read it, that no first use pledge starts to look more like a loophole. China's playbook says nukes come into the picture if a nuclear-armed superpower starts pounding its strategic targets and Beijing has no way to fight back. That's not code for anyone else. That's code for the United States. But this document points to red lines like strikes on the mainland, its infrastructure, or its cities. Hitting Chinese military targets at sea wouldn't count, which means if the fight stays limited to Taiwan, there's a real chance it doesn't go nuclear. But cross that line and the world starts glowing. A welcome sigh of relief, sure, but it's short-lived. We've done the sanctions math, now let's do the war math. What's the final number? A Bloomberg analysis found that a war for Taiwan would set the world back by $10 trillion. Only the United States and China have bigger economies than that. It's 10% of the entire global economy. So why would China risk it all? Historical claims and economic gain don't explain a gamble this big. China's rich again. Why rock the boat? Is a century-old civil war grudge really worth the bill? Taiwan sits in the middle of the first island chain, the ultimate prize. Right now, China's wealth is chained to foreign cooperation, bottled up by choke points it doesn't control. Take Taiwan, and that chain breaks. Ports like Suao and Hualien may be rubble after a fight, but once rebuilt, they'd hand Beijing a gateway straight into the Pacific. With Taiwan in its grip, China wouldn't just move ships. It could call the shots. The Strait, the South China Sea, the trade lifelines of Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, all under Beijing's thumb. This wouldn't just tilt the balance. It would rewrite the map, with China at the center. What's China willing to gamble for that payoff? We're about to see. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.